All right, last time we started talking about functions, we took a look at parameters. As with most languages, PHP allows you to have optional parameters. Right, so if you send it, it uses the value. So here's an example that says, show me this address. I guess that would echo it, I don't know. But you can send it 1, 2, this one is optional. Like most languages, PHP considers a parameter optional if it is assigned a value as it's a parameter. So these two are obviously required and this one's optional. So I can send it 123 Main Street, New York, New York, and it will use New York, not Wisconsin. However, if you send it, time to change the address, 933 Michigan Avenue, the old address of Midstate, Stevens Point, I didn't send it to state, it defaults to that state. In JavaScript, we had to be a little more creative. Had to find out how many parameters there were, and if there wasn't one, then pick a value for it. Here we've defined the value as part of the parameter. What you cannot do is have address be optional and state be required. Put state first. Cannot have optional parameters before required parameters. And things get really dicey when you have multiples and you don't provide, and you provide one optional and the other one not. But they get dealt with left to right order. So if you send two parameters, if this city was optional, for instance, and I sent it an address and a city, but an address and a zip, you can't do that. I'm sorry, state. Address and a state, but no city. Can't do that. Second parameter goes into city.
So you can't, if you had two required and two optional, you couldn't send in the two required and the last optional?
Correct. You cannot send the two required in the last optional
Without sending the third.
Without sending the third. And what most people would do in that circumstance is send the empty string or 0 or whatever as the third parameter, saying I'm not using it. But it wouldn't use the default value in that case. So that's correct. You can't do that. There's very few languages right now. The only one I know of, and I don't know Ruby on Rails, I have suspicion that it'll do it, is Objective-C. Allows you to send parameters in different ways because you can name your parameters. And you can name them as you send them, and I think Swift allowed us to do that as well, so that you can send parameters in the wrong order, but because they're labeled, we know where they go. Most languages wouldn't know that.
So now if you pass state by reference and as an optional parameter, if you don't...
By reference optional?
Yes.
Never been there. Give it a shot.
Okay.
Let me know how it
I don't
goes.
think that's going to work.
It does, seems a little odd, doesn't it? You'd have to assign it a default address. And how do you know what address it is in memory? Because if you're passing by reference optional, then you have to provide, in order to make it optional, you have to provide a default value.
Okay.
Remember, now you're talking about an address. And you have no clue what address on the server you're getting. Now he's right, that's not going to work. So like I said, go ahead, try that. Let me know how it goes. I have a pretty good suspicion now how it's going to go. We want to calculate the delivery date. So that's for our last two lines of code down here. So I'm going to create another function. And according to my notes, it says use the request array. I think it's mostly for demonstration purposes. Maybe, we've already done it. So I don't have anything coming in. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I do. Calculate the delivery date based on what? And so we can have a parameter. Did I give it a name? Time frame. Do that. $. And if I assign an initial value of plus 2 weeks to that, this is just a string, right? But what I plan to do is use that string in my modify command to modify current date or the date of the order, and say we're going to have it to you by such and such a date. And if I don't want 2 weeks, I can send something else in. If I'm kind of caught up and I want to make it 1 week, make my customers happy. This is a customer spends lots of money. I'm sending it expressed. I can change it to 3 days. But if I don't send anything in for the time frame, I get 2 weeks. Could this be a constant? I don't know how. That one just crossed my mind. I hate it when that happens. That one just crossed my mind. If I wanted to make it a constant, it would have to be outside, right? Which makes it global. Can I access global variables as a parameter, or do I have to first say they're global? Something. Ugh.
Try it.
What's the point? So you're gonna.
What's the point is if I want to change my constant from 2 weeks to 3 weeks, or from 1 to 1 week.
But if you're only using that concept one place.
If I'm only using it in one place, that's true. But if I'm using it in multiple, and I shouldn't because that's what the function's for. But if I were using it in multiple, that's an interesting question. Try
The
it.
way you could do it would be to put something in there, like some flag, and then test if it equaled that flag, then it equals the constant.
There are lots of workarounds. My question is there an easy way? Right. So now I can steal my existing code. Delivery date is a new date based on the sample date. Right now, I didn't send the order date in. I could have. That's another option. Again, when you build functions, it's kind of up to you, unless I give you an assignment that says thou shalt have functions that do this. But when you're building your own functions that do something for you, you get to determine how to communicate with that function. Pass by reference, pass by object, pass by arrays, send in 3 values, or in this case, because we're using PHP, we have the opportunity to simply use the request array. So my notes say to do, so I'm going to do that. So now I have all of the variables to me, and by the way, I lied up here when I said that I need them all, so that's why I'm going to use request, because the delivery date is in there. And we're not using that in this function. So down here, I'm only using 1 of 4. Maybe we'll rewrite it. Maybe my notes will tell me to rewrite it by adding a parameter to it. But at this point, at least now I've got functions that I can call at the appropriate time. And each one of these functions is going to return something. So in this case, we take the sample date, which is part of the request array, and modify it by the time frame. And that gives me the delivery date, which I can then return. So in this case, I'm returning an object, right? Because the date is an object.
Doesn't the request way technically make it easier because you're not mixing optional parameters with, required parameters?
Well, this 2 weeks is not part of my input from the user. Okay, who was it? John, I think, who in the tip calculator modified my tip calculator requirements and said, I'm going to ask the user for the tip amount. Use a default value of 20, but ask the user for a tip amount. In this program, I'm not asking the user to say how long is the delivery going to take. How am I going to pick something different here? They're going to have a way to enter it. They don't right now.
Line 46 should be delivery date.
Thank you. So now all of these things are here. Now where do I call them? And how do I call them? Let me see if there's anything I'll miss in my notes here. Use test with no parameter, test with a parameter, variable parameter lists. Okay, we'll leave that for a little bit. It's time to put this to use. This function, just so you know, is for demonstration purposes, how to get two things out without making an object. Pretty common, right? Because Swift has it so that we can do the tuple thing. I'm not a big fan of one function returns two things. This again ruins my cohesion. What if I want to have a function that only returns one value? I have to send it two just to get one. So it's not the slickest technique here. Normally I would split this and say calculate the total pounds or the end pounds and calculate the end ounces. Or I'd put them in a class. So where do I call these? This one's still kind of going through my head and I don't have a straight answer for you. And if you got anything to convince me one way or another, that's why I like this class. You guys can always convince me one way or the other. Or I can say, yeah, you guys haven't convinced me anything, but at least you'll try. One option is to go into the cases. And remember, I've now required my weights, and I'll bet if I save this, and go back to my page and refresh it, I won't get any errors. Keep forgetting that I have this a new skill for me now that I have to refresh the page using the button because the F5 doesn't work anymore. Darn Chrome.
That's only in Mac.
Huh?
It's only in Mac.
Oh, okay.
Yell at the Mac.
Okay, so notice my page is working again because I've taken out all of the commands that were outside of a function, now put them inside of a function and they never get executed. Now my program won't work if I try to display the results. But I'm not ready for that yet. That's where we're heading next. But at least all my errors are gone because all the code now is inside of functions. So now the argument I'm having with myself is, does it go in the cases file, this call to get me my variables? Right? Does it go here before I display my results? Or can I use those functions right inside my GUI? Don't have a straight answer for you.
Sounds like almost a preference.
Pardon me?
It almost sounds like it would be a preference.
Might be a preferences. Right. So what's the first thing I want to do? I want to calculate my end ounces and end pounds. And the function that I generated to do that is called calc the weight results. But this one's a little weird. Remember going back now, and I could probably do the splitter thing here and say, here's my weights file down here. And I hate it when it does that. Oh, this one goes to the bottom. There we go. Okay, so here's my cases. And now I'm calling calc weight results, which calls total ounces, which calls ounces to pounds, or pounds to ounces, excuse me. And then, again, I apologize, I'm doing a lot of scrolling. Got my total ounces. Notice this doesn't get called directly. It's kind of like an internal method, right? Private method. This doesn't get called directly. We get the total ounces divided by 16, those, and then these two values get returned. Now when I call them, what do I have to call them up here? Anything I want to. That would be pretty stupid. But the point is, it's legal. Right? What have I just done? I've declared a variable, right? It's PHP. Declared a variable. PHP says, never heard of it, goes and gets some memory. And then down here, it sees that there's an ampersand. And so it grabs the address of that and keeps a pointer to it. So I'm changing O. This one goes there. They do not have to have the same names. Common misperception in programming logic intermediate is I have a function and I have a call to that function. Any parameters, etc., have to have the same names as in the function. Not true at all. Otherwise, get random would be kind of painful, wouldn't it? You always have to call it min and always have to call it max. Call it whatever you want. The function calls it min and max. I can call it whatever I want. N pounds, N ounces is the name that's used locally for the address of those two variables. Now what I do need, and we'll test it here, but what I do need to figure out is, do I need to put, in some languages, this, every time I refer to N ounces, I have to put an ampersand on it. Or when I call it, I have to say, you're going to be sending the address. I don't think I have to do that in PHP. Most modern languages, if you put the ampersand down here, it asks for the address instead of the value. The function does. And from then on, it has the address, and when you're messing with it, it's changing the original. It somehow keeps all that straight. So at this point, what I've done is called that function and gotten two variables, and I'm going to change their name so it's a little easier for me to deal with, and that's N ounces and N pounds. Thank you. Now, what happens when I do that? Ruh-roh. Now I get the ounces where the pounds should be. You can do that, perfectly legal. But he's right.
So how does this case statement know where to find the function?
This function? All functions that are, first of all, it said it require it. Okay, so that brought it in. And once you brought it in, doesn't matter where they are, they're accessible. I could put my require statement probably down here underneath the switch and it'll still find them. Because before it does any of the compiling, it just builds all this PHP. And PHP has no rule that says you have to define the function before you can call it. A few languages do. Most languages today, you can define functions anywhere as long as they're visible, above, below, doesn't matter, it'll find them. So this is what makes the function available. At that point, I have my N pounds and my N ounces, and if I remember right, the only other thing I need for the output was the end date, or whatever that thing was called. So let's go look at the results here real quick. Don't think I need you anymore. Well, you know what? Let's just calculate it. I was going to just wing it and test this first. I got way too much code going on here without testing it, right? I've written 1, 2, 3, 4 functions. Now a call to a function. Now I'm going to call another function before I test anything. That's kind of scary. All kinds of things could go wrong there. PHP does not throw an error until you execute the line and it says I can't do this. That's when it finally throws an error. And at that point, as John told me during the break, everything quits. You get a PHP error in that first function and you just crash stop right there. You get no output, no nothing. If you use an include statement, it tries to go on, but you know what? My function doesn't work. The rest of it's going to be bogus anyway, so what's the point? So the next thing I need to calculate is I need to know the name that's expected. And down here it was calculated, it was delivery date. That's equal to calc the delivery date. And I'm not sending anything. By not sending anything, I'm basically saying use the default value for the parameter in this case. I called it delivery date. I didn't need to just because it's called delivery date in the function. Again, that's a local variable. Who cares? So down here is the calculate delivery date. This is a local variable. There's no global variable. There's no variable created by extract called delivery date. Just sample date. So that's a local variable. If I don't return it, like every other local variable, it's lost when the function is done. So I return a variable called delivery date to a global variable called delivery date. Why is that one global? It's inside my cases file. Why is it global? It's not inside a function. There's no function here. It's just a switch statement. If it's not inside a function, it's global. Since it's global, my results view now has access to this, that, and that, because all of these are global.
Why is delivery date global?
This delivery date
Yeah.
is not inside a function. The one down below in the bottom screen is inside a function, so it's local.
They're separate.
They're two different variables. It's as if you had a variable inside a function, also had a class level or a,
Oh, yeah, because you don't have to declare. I'm sorry. I was thinking, I was like, isn't there a delivery date in the like request that you have to extract? But thanks.
we don't declare them. At this point, PHP says, I don't have any variable called delivery date, so I'm going to create one, and whatever this function sends me, I'm going to put it in that variable. This function lives in its own little world, and it says, give me whatever's in the request array. It does have access to that part of the universe. But then it lives in its own little world, takes the sample date from the request array, calculates a new date called delivery date, and sends that value to whoever asked. And that's where I ask, is up here.
So technically, what is class level instead of global?
I hate to call it class level because I haven't seen any classes anywhere.
No.
The super globals are what you are used to as globals, where everybody has access to them, no question. That's a super global. And all the super global arrays start with dollar signs and underscores, and they're all caps. Okay. Any other variable that's declared outside of a function is global. That means that the PHP that I have in my request form, or results form, in my results form, I'm looking for the item name. Where's that come from?
Nowhere so far.
My request array, so nowhere so far, because once upon a time my extract was done somewhere else. So should my extract be done here? Oh boy, I'm not a big fan of doing extracts in the requests. I've done it. I might be better off doing, here's my request array, and what I might do in this case, I think I will, is not extract at all, but just extract these 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 5 items, that's worth an extract to me. There's no calculations involved, right? The rule is GUIs don't do calculations. So here, instead of printing R, and that might not be bad, let's do the extract as well. That gives me access to all of these things because I'm echoing them. How often do you echo your inputs? Maybe not very often. But in this case, because I am echoing them, I'm going to extract them so that these are now available to me.
Those global variables, are they available to everything in the program or whatever you want to call it, or are they?
Everything that's not in a function has direct access to the global variables. So here, I'm accessing the global variable item name. Why is it global? Because I extracted it right there. I'm not in a function.
Yeah, but you don't need the global prefix on it.
What global? No, I don't, because I'm not in a function. Global is only used inside of a function to see what's outside. Seems backwards, doesn't it? Normally we say this is global and now everybody in the world has access to it. In PHP, if a function needs access to the outside world, we haven't written any that way, and I don't recommend. I avoid it as much as I can. I used to have students in my systems class a while back that came from Herb's classes in Rapids, and the thought of using a global variable just made them cringe. And they went through some pretty horrendous steps sometimes to avoid global variables, sending pieces of data from all the different places. But your first instinct is avoid them unless I tell you otherwise. And sometimes if they're just used all over the place, make them global. Couldn't I have here said extract? Yes. And then couldn't I just get rid of this one? Yes. But then I'd have to replace it with a global followed by every single variable name that I need, which in this case is 1, right? So should we see that? Which one do I need? Dollar sample date. But the only way that works is because I extracted up here first. I extracted before I called the function.
I understand the extract, but is that actually available to all the files, or is it just the file that you?
What files?
Like you have this file open, weights.php. Is it also available to?
Depends on how I put them together.
It all
Okay.
becomes index.
It all becomes one big, huge PHP file when we're done. It's just an index file, right? It's all one big, huge, ugly index file. So whichever files I bring in to require or include,
So
yes,
the one
they all
that's-
have access to the global variables.
So then you could just do it on the index page and nowhere else, right?
Could. But if you put it on the index page, then I'm extracting every single time I go to the index page. And there's sometimes when there is no extract, when there is no request array because I'm not coming from a form, not a good plan. I've got some made up examples here, and your example is not going to be a whole lot better. Well, there's no database here. This is a handy dandy little form. If I was doing this handy dandy little form and the way it exists, it would all be done in JavaScript. There's no database involved. Why do I need PHP to do these calculations? I don't. But we have to learn, we want to practice a little bit about functions, look at some optional parameters. Here I've got a global one, but I don't like the global one in here because it makes that a request. It does that. And then when I get to this function, couldn't I use end pounds and end ounces, the global variables? No, because they don't exist yet. Not in that one. They're not extracted. How about this one? Couldn't I get item weight pound and whatever that next one is, item weight ounces from the global array? Yes, I could. And the number of items? Yes, I could. And I don't have to extract them again. What happens if I leave both of them in there? It works. I've just extracted the array twice. Do I really need to extract it twice, or is that redundant? One's local. How long do these variables last? Billionths of a second. And they're gone again. The super global arrays have gotten rid of, I think, a lot of some of that stuff. I'm just demonstrating that some of these things are possible. So
You don't ever change a variable from request to array.
I don't think it's a good idea, no. Can you? It's simply an array at this point, so yes, you can. And you can basically tell your PHP processor, the form lied, this is what it really sent you. Not usually a good idea.
If you need to change it, wouldn't you just put it in a new variable? Wouldn't that make
That's,
more
yeah, that's
sense?
what if I need to change the contents, I want to manipulate, format, unformat something, put it in a new variable. You can change it directly. There's nothing to say that if I have a number formatted with dollar signs and commas and all that junk in there and I want to get all that stuff out, that I can't change it. Or if I have a date in there that's formatted with slashes instead of dashes or whatever.
I guess if you were really tight on memory space.
Yeah, if you were, but why, you're on a server for heaven's sakes. If your server's that tight on memory space, it's time to update. Okay, so I don't know if I want to leave this. Let's say make the, what did I make? The sample date. This is for demo purposes. How do globals work, okay? Only for demo purposes. This is not something I do not normally extract in the cases file. Let's see if this stuff works. Again, I haven't pressed test yet. So this says calculate that stuff. This says calculate that stuff. And then when we get to the actual form, And when we get to the actual form, this stuff's coming from the extract statement here. Extract it again. This one I no longer need. That one's definitely redundant because I extracted at the global level, and now I'm extracting at the global level again. So now this, and this are all available because of that extract statement.
If you didn't have that extract, the demo extract statement, you would need it in the.
I would need it down here, or I'd have to get these some other way. There is a way. We saw it, I think, briefly in the index file to pull one element of the request array. So if I wanted to down here, I could say request square brackets item name.
Oh, wait.
But I'd have to do it 5 times, right? If I only had to do it once, I'd do it. If I have to do it 5 times, I go, that's too hard for me as a programmer. Plus it's longer, plus it's harder to read. So I don't want to do that necessarily. So now those are available. End pounds, end ounces, sample dates still available from up here. Why am I echoing it twice? I don't know. But these don't have the right names, do they? Because here I am generating. This generates, and that's another reason I don't like pass by reference. That is so hard to see there.
Doesn't work either.
Doesn't work? So you're ahead of me already. Because even if the names match, it doesn't work?
It doesn't work because it says on line 9 there, it'll say that end pounds doesn't exist.
So I can't put it in the parentheses
You're passing something that doesn't exist.
by reference. Okay, so that's another bad example. So here we go. Let's just do this and say that end pounds equals 0 and end ounces equals 0. I think it was Dylan, unfortunately, in iOS who said stupid rules say when before I can use these, I have to initialize them. That's kind of what we're doing. Create variables so we can pass by reference. And then down here, I just have to make sure that the names are the same.
This goes against everything that you have ever said. Why are you making a function that does multiple things?
Exactly. So you can see how, should you need one that returns 2 values. Here, pounds and ounces kind of go together, right?
No.
No? When you weigh things, don't you get pounds and ounces together?
Yeah, and it would say 1.1.
It
And
would
then
be measured in
pounds
ounces, and then you
but
just
you want
convert it.
pounds and you want ounces.
Good. So if you can come up with a better example that's fairly simple of why I would want to pass by reference, bring it. Otherwise, deal with this.
No, I understand what you're doing.
Yeah, okay. I'm doing it for example. You're right. He's absolutely right. And so are the rest of you. You're all going, I've got a function that does 2 things. If I want pounds and ounces, why don't I send out a decimal and then convert the decimal to pounds and ounces? Or why don't I have a class called weight that has pounds and ounces in it and send out the object? There are dozens of better ways. That's why I just kind of cringed when I saw tuples in Swift. I'm going, I don't see it. Except for simple things, right? Was the explanation. If you have a function that does simple things, it only returns 2 simple values. Instead of creating a class to hold those 2 values, here's an opportunity. But with like weight, pounds and ounces, I'd probably be very likely to reuse that class and make it do all kinds of funky stuff. All right, so yes, you're right. Now it should work. You try that, Reen?
Well,
Okay, I think I fixed this one. So let's just save everybody.
I'm still confused. So if you took out that extract,
This one?
yes.
Okay, remember where that is. Case for those, it's in the cases file. Consider the cases file the controller because this gets sucked into the controller, right?
Right.
If I take that out, I no longer have
And you have
this
to-
sample date variable. I don't have that one. I don't have that one when I call the request. Because here I include my results page, right? If I don't do this extract, these are no longer available to me. Unless I put it here. If I do both, does it cause any trouble? No, but that would be even more stupid compared to what I usually tell you to do. So, okay.
So if you weren't doing it for demo purposes, would you usually put it in your results? I guess, is what I'm after.
In this case, yes, because I'm echoing all my inputs. If I have a form like that that echoes all the inputs, here's your receipt for this, and here's the customer name and all that other stuff that came from the other form, and I'm not getting it from a database, then maybe. So I don't like it here. I prefer it here, but now I'm also demonstrating the darn global sample date, right?
Right.
So there's lots of demos here, but not necessarily the right way to do it. Okay, so let's refresh this page. Still got some ounces and pounds there that should work okay. Go. There's my extract that, 88.2. Dates look okay. So it seems to have worked. This is just somewhere I must have print art it. Was that? Yeah, it's right there. So here's what came to me. Action is weights result, inkjet printer, weight pound is 8. So that's what came. That's not telling me much too new here. So all of these are echoing properly. Now, when I said echo before, you understand it's not because I'm using the echo command. Echo to me means it came in, just spit it right back out without changing it. That's my old term for echo. Now we have a command called echo. Okay. I'm not doing that because I want to use the echo commands, because I'm taking my inputs and simply spitting them back out again. That's where this extract comes from. Now, what happens if I take this one out? And then I have to put this one back in again. Otherwise, none of this is defined. Prove it. This page hasn't changed, so this should show me the results right away. None of those variables are available because I never extracted them. So at this level, and it's talking about line 6 on the results page, line 6, never heard of it. This is very common.
How's it getting that delivered on me?
How did I what? How did my delivery date work? Because it's optional, and so it filled in the default value, which is 2 weeks. He's right.
2 weeks from what? Today.
The sample date. How did I get the sample date? Here comes the next step. Right. Now I've extracted here, but my delivery date is calculated here. And now in my delivery date, I'm going to change gears on you here, sorry. In my delivery date, I'm saying give me the global variable called sample date. I'm guessing that's going to give me an error, right? Because there isn't one anymore because we moved this. There's no sample date anymore. Make sure I saved everything. Still worked.
Not really, because it's, oh wait, yeah, 123. I thought you were going back.
Okay, I'm going back and I'm going to refresh the main page just to make sure I'm using all the right pieces parts. I don't expect the date to work, and dang it, it is working. Why is global sample date working?
Right. But
Is
it
it
was,
created?
you're getting the same answer before when I asked, like, why did you get a delivery date when you had all the errors across the top and ordered on was blank. So if you
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
if you go up and comment out your extract in the results.
But the results are calculated, oh, they're calculated here. That's why.
Right, so if you comment out the extracted result,
Yes.
you still get 2015 216. You still get a, so,
Really?
yeah, and that's 2 weeks from today. So it's somehow recognizing
It's,
the date.
yeah, it's exactly. I want to switch these around here.
Probably because new date time and sample date doesn't exist. So it's just sends it,
Nothing was just
No, because my sample date,
won't exist.
because it's no longer.
oh, that's what, okay, I'm sorry. Look at the date. It's 15, not 12. So what that's saying is he's right. Use the global sample date. There isn't one. Oh, well, I guess it didn't complain. It has to.
Doesn't it just create one right there though?
No, it wouldn't create one. I'm thinking it just goes, that's null.
But then I tried a new date on a null.
Which would be today, because new date time with nothing in it would be today, right?
This is really the only way to find out. It's obviously using today because that's 2 weeks from today. Okay, but am I getting null, or am I gonna, is this gonna give me an error because there is no sample date? Do I get the empty string? This is where we find out. Sample date is nothing. Okay, so if the global variable doesn't exist, you get nothing. And then when I created a new date time from that, it gave me today, bump it up by 2 weeks. So that was one I'm glad we paid close attention to. So now what's the solution? And notice flipping these around didn't make much difference. Right? It doesn't really matter which order I calculate these in, as long as they're calculated before I try to display them. But now if I take this out, and I'll leave it again as a demo, as a comment, if I take that out and say extract the request array here, that'll extract it again for one variable, right? Sample date. Or I could simply say, and this is probably a better solution, the sample date is equal to the request sample date element.
That would be more efficient, right?
Probably be more efficient. And the other alternative is just skip the darn thing and put this in there. Also legal. If I'm using the sample date out of the sample or out of the request array. In this case, it might be even smarter to just send that in. Calculate the delivery date considering that this is when it was ordered and this is the time span. I could make them both optional, right? Yes, but then I wouldn't be able to say calculate the delivery date plus 3 weeks because I have to provide an initial, the first parameter, which is the date. Can't just leave the first optional one out. So these are all the thought processes that are going through your head. You're trying to figure out functions in PHP, and even more importantly, when you're trying to figure out, do I use the request array? Do I not use the request array? Let's save that, test it, because we're about out of time. And now my sample date is right, and
Yep.
I saw the 6 once upon a time, and so when I saw the 16, my brain just didn't register it. But one of you saw probably most of you, just not me, saw the 2015 in that date. So now that works, and again, we can pick this up and just plug it in right here and never extract it, as long as I get rid of my echo statement. And just plug it in, it would work. But that gives me a function that is tied to the request array. And that might not be the best way to do it. Now, I mentioned to you Sorry, I know it's almost, I got 20 seconds. Let's see how I can do. I mentioned to you that we can do this. We can do all of our calculations inside the class, inside the cases file, excuse me. The other alternative, as I see it, is to go to the results page, and down here, do a calculate delivery date, which returns a date, which I then should be able to send to the format function. Is that so bad, calling a function from the GUI? I don't think so. I'm not doing any math. I'm asking somebody else to do it. It's still calling the business class saying, give me this number.
It's just calling it while it's generating the page, so
It's always generating a page.
same thing.
Yeah. I don't think that's so bad. Still works. So, as long as all you're doing in the GUI is calling a function, I'm fine with that. The only thing I can think of here is this guy is doing math from the cases, but the delivery date is doing math right in the GUI. To me, it makes more sense to do all your math in one place. Right? So this is perfectly legal. You can call the functions directly, but I'm doing some of it here. Look now, if I take that comment out, this is getting a little confusing. Wait a minute, doesn't the results page have a delivery date on it? Where did that get calculated? Because of the way I designed this stupid thing, I can't call that, right? Because it doesn't return a value. It fills two local variables. So my bad design is affecting me from putting functions in my GUI. My advice to you is do your calculations in one location. Either put them in the cases file, do all your calcs in the cases file, which is what I started with, or do them all in the GUI so that you're going function, 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 function. That's my advice.
Would you, if you were going to, oh wait, never mind, I see it.
All right, let's stop this one, take 10, come back and carry on.